Welcome to the Craft of Coaching podcast, where we dive into what it truly takes to become a skilled, confident life coach. I'm your host, Kate, head of the CLCC, or Certified Life Coach Collective, an ICF-accredited Level 1 coach training program. We combine courage, coaching, and community to offer you more than just a training program, but a life-changing experience where you use your own personal transformation as the learning ground for supporting your clients. On this podcast, we explore how you can use coaching skills to support your clients or expand your own growth, all grounded in evidence-based coaching practices. Learn more about our program and get free resources for becoming a life coach at teamclcc.com. And now, here's today's episode. Okay, so we've got another amazing guest for the Craft of Coaching podcast. Everyone, Kimball. Hi, Kim. How you doing? Welcome.
Hi, Kate. I am doing well. I'm so happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
Of course. You are so many amazing things. We first met because you're a CLCC grad, but your coaching business has really gone through its own evolution since you first started the program. And I want people to get an opportunity to just kind of land with you. So if you would just introduce yourself and a little bit about who you be.
Yeah, absolutely. So as you said, I'm Kim Kimball. I call myself a somatic leadership coach for highly sensitive and neurodivergent entrepreneurs. And essentially what that means in very plain language is that I personally believe that being an entrepreneur is meant to bring up all your stuff. It's just something that when you go into it, all of your fears of being seen, rejection, people pleasing, perfectionism, all of the things, it's going to come up and it's meant to. And so I help entrepreneurs navigate that really on a body level, on a nervous system level, not just on a mindset level, let us power through, but really taking all of you and your humanity into account. So that's a little bit about what I do.
Yeah. And I love that you bring in this nervous system regulation piece, because the feelings of fear, overwhelm, anxiety that people have when they step into entrepreneurship are really real. You know, in CLCC, we say about the training, this program's going to bring up all your shit and it's going to be the best thing that ever happened to you.
Yes, exactly that. Same in business. Yes.
Yes. And I was just about to say, like, it sounds like you're saying that's the same thing that happens in business. You know, entrepreneurship is like this incredible personal growth opportunity. And it's not that we're saying, and correct me, of course, if I'm wrong here. It's not that you would ever say, well, look, it's going to bring up a lot of stuff, deal with it. It's more so you're saying it's going to bring up a lot of stuff. Let's work on that nervous system regulation so that you can actually feel a sense of centeredness with it.
Yeah, it's going to bring up a lot of stuff, and let me help equip you to learn how to support yourself through it. Mm-hmm. Because nothing has gone wrong here when it brings up stuff. And you can also learn how to support yourself through it so it doesn't feel like such a roller coaster. And so it feels way more sustainable and nourishing, and the process can feel more fun and all of the things. You know, I really look at business ownership like an initiation, like any other initiation in your life. You know, I have felt similar things with, for example, CLCC or marriage, or, you know, for some folks, long-term partnership, with having a child. Like any of that stuff has been an initiation that has brought up my stuff.
Yeah.
And it's just a question of, you know, what are you going to do with that? How are you going to support yourself through it? And I would much rather folks feel equipped and supported so they can be around for the long game, right? Rather than, oh, this flash in the pan, I had this great idea to start a business one time and then it fizzled out because it was too much for me to be seen in this way or to kind of go through this initiation.
Yeah. And it's something I've talked about with other Craft of Coaching guests and on other episodes about how often it is that early stage coaches take that discomfort or dysregulation or that fear or overwhelm, and they turn it into a story that coaching isn't actually for them. And this is what I love about the work you're doing, because we need people doing the work you're doing to essentially say, no, 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 hold on. If you loved this coaching work, if you felt that spark, let's find the way for it to be sustainable for you. But I know that that's not where you initially started. And so I'm wondering if you could tell us a little bit about like how you and your business evolved to then go, this is actually the direction I want to go in, of supporting people around nervous system integration.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was thinking about this question and I was kind of transported back to being in your living room. And I think it was before the mentor coach, the retreat that I was in, and in your living room in Petaluma. And, sitting there thinking, you were interviewing us on what our coaching practice was. And I remember saying a big thing about boundaries, and that my thing was to help folks with boundaries and, to stop people pleasing, to stop perfectionism, and really becoming centered within themselves. Right. And the funny thing is that I used to think that that was the entirety of my work. And of course, I based kind of my entire niche around that work. And the funny thing is that that is still a huge part of my work, just in a very different way, right? All of the things that have been kind of the niches that I have pivoted to throughout my 8 years as a coach, they're all still there, just in a little bit of a different iteration, and a little almost like, a diamond that you can just turn a quarter turn and it's just being reflected through a different facet. That's kind of what I look at it as. It's like all the core tenets are still there. It's just, I personally really found that I like this business owner lens in particular, and the way that folks really take full ownership of the stuff that's being brought up when they are in the business owner role. But like I said, initially I was in this boundaries space and thinking that I wanted to work with that. And then I sort of pivoted to relationships, and was really working with relationship work. And I found that, that's amazing work, and I love anyone that does it. But for me, I didn't like the like he said, she said, or, kind of like the back and forth of like kind of really breaking down the interactions and looking at that kind of inevitably came up in that work. That wasn't really my jam. And then I pivoted into like highly sensitive person coaching, which of course obviously is still there in the flavors of my work here. But again, just really wanted folks that were a bit farther along in their journey and wanted to take a bit more self-responsibility, which I found entrepreneurs, business owners really brought to the table a little bit more. So that's sort of the evolution of the work, if you would, and how I landed here. And like I said, I can look back on it, and all the tenets of my work have really honestly been the same all throughout the core 8 years that I've been doing this work. It just shows up in a little bit different flavors every time.
And what was it like for you to make those pivots? I'm thinking about sunk cost bias, which I know is very common for a coach to go, this is one of the reasons why in the CLCC marketing, I tell people, do not go out and spend $10,000 to get a fancy branded website, because you probably are going to change it. There's sunk cost bias. I put all this time, this effort, etc. I think I hear a decision you've made internally just based on what you're sharing, but I wondered if you'd put it into your own words, what that was like to decide to pivot, who exactly you serve, to tweak, to refine.
Yeah, the decision that I've made internally, Kate, to name it outright, that I feel like is a really important decision and has been really key for the longevity of my business and me continuing to show up as a coach and serve, is that I've decided to allow myself to evolve. I've decided that it's normal and natural to evolve, and that I'm not going to stop myself in that process, and that I'm not going to box myself in. And that if if something is feeling like clunky to me, something is feeling off, and I give that enough time and it continues to feel like friction, it continues to rub, then I experiment with something else, and see how that feels. And if that feels better to me, great, I start moving in that direction. For me, I don't look at anything as a sunk cost because I'm taking with me everything that I've learned in my business thus far. Like there's never any starting over from scratch. There just isn't. And I think that, I personally view evolution and allowing myself to evolve as healthy, and sort of keeping myself boxed in for the sake of, oh, well, my website is set up this way. Oh, I have all these offers. Oh, I've already done all this. Like that to me feels far more uncomfortable and far more unhealthy. And a lot of that might just be the way that I'm wired, but it truly is a decision that I have made of allowing myself to be a human that evolves. And I think that it's natural for us to do that.
What I hear throughout everything you share is attending to your nervous system. That like when something, I heard you say a moment ago, when something feels kind of off, and, sitting with that, not necessarily being reactive about it, but sitting with it, attending to it.
Yes.
And that is your work. You're doing a lot about nervous system regulation. And, you talk a lot about nervous system regulation, and there's more of that discussion in the coaching world, but that you have something of a different take, that sometimes what people are calling regulation, nervous system regulation, is actually bypassing. And I think it's related to this conversation that we're having about a coach sometimes feeling dysregulated about, how do I do this coaching thing or build out a business that I love? Oh, I don't feel like I can do it. Must mean it's not for me. Must mean that it's, So your take is that nervous system regulation can sometimes be actually bypassing. So would you share more with us about what is true regulation to you? How does this connect to liberation, to freedom, to doing things your own way, unhooking from systems like capitalist systems that can be predatory? It's kind of a big question to unpack. But
it is a big question, but I think it's a really important one, because I think, quote unquote, nervous system regulation is sort of all the rage and all the buzz right now. And I sort of feel the need to say, I'm also a doctor of physical therapy, which means I have a doctoral level education in nervous system. This isn't something that I'm just sort of slapping on there. I have literally dissected a brain on a doctoral level, right? So I understand the nervous system on a very deep level. And there's this kind of what I call like pop psychology about nervous system, quote unquote, like I said, regulation. And it seems to be that we think that we're regulated when we're calm. Like if I'm calm, if I'm able to carry on, if I'm able to sort of show no outward signs of distress, that means that I am regulated. And the more I can do that in the face of distress, the more powerful I am, the more regulated I am, right? And really, even as I'm saying this, the thing that comes up for me is I start thinking about, and I know this might be kind of like a weird metaphor to bring in, but I'm thinking about funerals within the United States and how composed they are, and how there's, people wearing black and there's like, oh, one little dab of a tear, I'm not going to have any real show of emotion. And this to me is the oppressive systems, right? Of like, you need to button up, you need to carry on, you need to go back to work the next day, you need to continue to produce. You can probably hear in my voice how passionate I am about this sort of thing. But really, in the situation that I'm describing of like, let's say you're going to the funeral of a partner of 60 years, to me, the regulated thing is to be wailing on the floor.
Mm-hmm.
It is to be like ripping your clothes and like throwing ashes, like a lot of villages do, right? To have a month long of mourning or whatever it is, to wear your black cloth, to have the sign of mourning on you. Like people literally attend to you. What can I do for you? How can I be with you? that would be the quote unquote regulated response. Mm-hmm. So really, to me, the regulated response is to have the response that is appropriate for the circumstance.
Yes. Yes. And everyone feels these things differently. Like this idea of a culturally conditioned, narrow window of what you're allowed to feel is, I think, damaging to spirits. And I think also tends to create a sort of internal war within the self between who someone wants to be and who they are expected to be for others. And it's performative, and nobody feels fully alive when they're performative.
Yeah. You know, there have been times when I looked regulated because I was able to be completely calm in the face of something that I honestly shouldn't have. Like, an appropriate response would have been anger. And I remember a therapist sitting across from me and saying, Kim, doesn't that make you angry? And it was so puzzling to me. I was like, what do you mean? Like, I couldn't access my anger. I couldn't access healthy aggression in my system. And that was actually a sign of dysregulation, not health. Right?
Yeah, I can very much relate to that in my marriage. If I am lethally quiet, it's not good.
Yeah.
You know, like my husband knows that if we are having a disagreement, and instead of just like talking it through, I get really quiet. And especially if I start cleaning, if I am quiet and I am cleaning,
rage cleaning.
Rage cleaning. Exactly. Like I am pissed when we get to that point. Yes. It is not good. So yes. So, but to your point, like this idea that the healthy expression of emotions is what we need to be doing, instead of looking at a kind of stoicism as the model for somebody who has it all perfectly buttoned up and together. And how do we get out of those constraints is part of the work that you help people to do.
Yeah, you know, it's essentially, the best way I could sum it up very quickly is allowing the animal of our body to be the animal of our body. Like animals in the wild, you know, I know a lot of times in the somatic world, this is a very common metaphor or thing that's talked about. If a gazelle gets chased by a lion and the gazelle ends up getting away from the lion, the gazelle will shake and discharge this fight flight energy so it doesn't get stuck in that state. And the fact that it can shake and discharge that and do what the animal of its body needs to do in that situation is really, really what prevents it from getting stuck in these dysregulated states, right? Well, because we are socialized, which is appropriate in many ways, right, for certain societal norms, we kind of squelch that animal of our body from the different expressions that it needs to be healthy. And again, this relates back to colonialism, to capitalism, to all of the systems of oppressions and the ways that we just want to stay a cog in a wheel and keep us producing, because it's not really good for that producing, in order to have this moment where we allow ourselves to complete whatever nervous system charge is running through us. So yeah.
Yeah, I love how you just said complete whatever nervous system charge is running through us, because I once heard Brene Brown either give a talk or was interviewed on a podcast, and she said that the average emotion lasts for about 90 seconds.
That's it.
And I thought, like the most intense average emotion. And I thought of times where I had been angry and thought, and the key here is it lasts for 90 seconds if you just sit with it. Now, if you feed it by reminding yourself of how pissed off you are, it continues. If you feed the sadness by continuing to replay whatever is causing the sadness, it continues. But I thought that was a great way to frame a tool for how to notice, how to be with an emotion and let it just sit, but not necessarily feed it and let it become more. So, so where you've landed is that you work with highly sensitive, even neurodivergent entrepreneurs. And so I'm wondering, how do you see nervous system patterns showing up uniquely for them in business? What is it that they are experiencing that other people are not experiencing? And what are some shifts that they start to see when they are really aligning with, hey, I'm highly sensitive, I'm neurodivergent. What shifts can they expect to see when they start to recognize that and align with that?
Yeah, I think most folks who are highly sensitive and neurodivergent, honestly, come in with a lot more shame than a neurotypical person, because they've been, most people that I work with say something along the lines of, I feel like a square peg that's been trying to be shoved in a round hole all my life. And that's very true, because you've been trying to be shoved in a neurotypical mold, right? Someone who is not as sensitive as you, someone that doesn't have executive functioning, challenges, whatever it may be. And you've internalized, a lot of folks have internalized all these things of, well, I've got, especially, in many areas, but in business specifically, I'm talking about here, I've got to do things in this way, which this way, I mean, neurotypical norms of, I've got to show up in my business consistently. And by consistently, most of the time, in neurotypical norms, that means the same way at the same frequency all the time, right?
Right.
And for people who are neurodivergent, that just doesn't work, and it's going to burn them out. I see people go through these really creative surges and then burnout, and then creative surges and then burnout. They'll try to show up in ways that just aren't consistent to their way of being, to their wiring. Like, for example, a lot of times folks can be very introverted, or let's say they don't like video, or they feel very exposed, or like there's rejection sensitivity, for example, that happens a bunch. And yet they kind of, quote unquote, force themselves to do these things that other people have told them that they have to do in order to be successful in business. And then, like I said, they burn out. And so really what I find is, first of all, really peeling back the layers of, okay, let's really get honest and accepting of how you're wired, and look at how beautiful it is and how nothing needs to change. And let's build your business around that, instead of forcing yourself in some bro marketing thing that just doesn't work for you and is going to burn you out and not allow your business to be sustainable in the long term.
I'm curious about this. Is it always a question of find a different system that works for you, or is it sometimes guiding someone to get more comfort? Because I look at certain things like, I'm thinking about myself. I don't identify as neurodivergent. And I would say, for instance, I, for a very long time, had like a lot of trouble with video. And it's funny because I made myself do it though, because I saw the writing on the wall that video was going to become more and more popular. And especially when I first started, fewer people were making videos. And so it was kind of like, whoa, like this is a newer thing. If you're making a video, you kind of stood apart if you're making a video. And because I don't identify as neurodivergent, that's why I'm asking the question. For me, it was a matter of, okay, this is something outside my comfort zone, and I need to do the work to move in the direction of that, or I've decided to. So to come back to the question, is it a matter of finding different systems, or is there an attunement that you guide people through?
Yeah, I think it's both, Kate. And so I'll sort of give an example here. Let's just use the video example because you were already on that. I think it can be both in that, first of all, I think a lot of it is it something that the person feels passionately enough about that they want to stretch in that area? Because sometimes I think for some folks, it'll be like, yeah, I want to be able to stretch myself out of my comfort zone here. And in those cases, I want to be able to help folks do that in a way that feels like a stretch, but still doable. Because what I see most often is that folks try to kind of shove themselves off the edge, and it's like, okay, I'm uncomfortable with videos, so I'm going to do like a 30-minute long video a day from now until like 2 months from now. And that just doesn't go well for their nervous system, because there's a huge contraction that happens after that. So you've got to sort of build it up slowly, right? But I say it's a combination because You got to really check in, and like, you can only stretch in so many areas at a time to be within your capacity. So it's a nervous system capacity thing of, okay, maybe the video is really important to me. And so therefore I'm going to choose to stretch in this one, and I'm going to allow something else. Maybe it's like posting daily or whatever to take a back seat, because that would also be a stretch. And I've only got so much capacity for stretch. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's sort of weighing that and figuring out what's important to the individual business owner and entrepreneur. And there's also kind of a knowing there of like, some folks, A, it's not important to them, or B, it's like, listen, I know that no matter what I try, this is always going to feel like death to me, and I just don't want to do it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, cool. Then let's do something else. Right. So I think it's so nuanced there. Hopefully that answers that question.
It does. Yeah. And I think too about the fact that there's, 100 different ways to make a business work. And, the keys that I think never change and have not changed is always, what problems are people facing, the people you want to serve, and what solutions do you provide? So if you want to have your marketing flow through Facebook ads or Google AdWords, AdSense, whatever Google's ad thing is called, I'm not an ads person, by the way, full disclosure. If somebody wants to do it through that, though, as long as they're speaking to problems people face and solutions they desire, great. If someone wants to market themselves through a podcast, great. If someone wants to market themselves through a white paper, great. But like, at the end of the day, you've got to just speak to that core. And I think it's really important for everyone, regardless of whether they're highly sensitive, neurodivergent, introverts. I actually do identify as an introvert, and I think that's part of why video was more of a challenge for me. It's as long as you're coming back to that core, success is a possible outcome.
Yeah. I always say to folks, anything can work. Mm-hmm. So why not choose the thing that feels the most sustainable to you? Why not choose the thing that feels the most aligned to you? And of course, you can always choose. I think I personally think that everyone as a business owner should be choosing a stretch. It's something that I kind of do in some of my group containers. Okay, let's choose a stretch for the month that we're going to intentionally work on. And also knowing that, let's say, if you're in a really challenging season in your life, you're not going to choose something to stretch as much. You don't have capacity to. Mm-hmm. And I think the thing that happens a lot is that folks hold themselves to rigid standards, and they don't allow it to flux and ebb and flow according to season of life or whatever it is that they're going through. And then that becomes this ammunition that they're beating themselves up about. And that really stalls their progress.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's really interesting how often we turn to beating up on ourselves for not measuring up in some way, when all the psychological research shows that really just doesn't work. It's like, I mean, we can go to the most classic example of like a manager in a job giving a direct report really, harsh critical feedback. They might get compliance from that employee, but it'll only ever be performative. Like they lose respect for the manager. The employee is actually more likely to make mistakes because they're going to be hypervigilant. And I think, that's an example because most people have worked a job they can relate to, but then people get into working for themselves and they forget, am I being a good manager to myself? Am I treating myself and managing myself the way that I would hope to be managed by somebody else?
And yeah, so common. I think that more often than not, we sort of internalize these toxic systems and then we perpetuate them with ourselves in our own business. Super common.
Okay. Well, for a final question, let's go back to this idea about sustainability, because we've touched on it a few times, finding systems and practices that are sustainable for a business owner. Tell us, what does sustainability mean through a nervous system or somatic lens?
Yeah, for me, it quite simply means being able to hold your business, hold all the things that come along with it without feeling like you're having to extract from yourself, that you're having to force yourself, that you're having to abandon yourself for whatever it is that you're trying to do, right? So that means, okay, when I name my price, I feel like I can hold it. When the amount of client caseload that I have, I feel like I can hold that. It doesn't feel like it's overextending me in any way. I'm not, running around like a chicken with my head cut off. My marketing systems and the things that I do to market myself, I feel like I can hold that. So it's less about scaling and numbers and systems and more about, is the way that you are doing things in your business something that you feel like you can hold without this depletion, without this self-extraction, without this abandoning of self? Does it feel good to you? Is it something you can hold? And to me, that's what sustainability means.
Yeah. Yeah. And it takes time to figure out those systems, and knowing what is sustainable and how to hold that truly is make or break for success. And so, someone partnering with you so that they can get that guidance and like, hold on a minute, that 10,000 foot view, this is exactly what coaching is designed to provide, because otherwise people stumble their way through it and then look back and go, it didn't have to be that hard.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, Kim, it's been a pleasure and a delight to get to reconnect with you, to have you on the Craft of Coaching podcast. You bring so many gifts, and I, of course, will link out to your website and everything throughout the publication process of the podcast. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. This was really fun to reconnect, Kate.
All right, that's it for today's episode. Thank you so much for listening. Before you go, would you help us out and take a moment to give us a rating in iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you're listening? It really helps us get the word out to other listeners. And before you go today, would you like free resources to support your coaching journey? Whether you're considering becoming a coach or you want advanced coach skills training, access our coaching resource library at teamclcc.com. Again, that's teamclcc.com. Can't wait to connect with you. And again, thanks for listening.